We are back on Kern Radio Newstalk 1180 with Clay Kerner, Brandon Martin, and I'm Marty Pay. I'm excited about our next guest. Brandon, do you want to introduce our next guest?
Mm-hmm. I'm excited, too. I've followed Brian Calle's work. I believe it's on freedompolitics.com. Is that right, Brian?
Yes, and the Orange County Register as well.
I know you're a journalist with the Orange County Register, and you're affiliated with the Claremont Institute, which is a great think tank.
Yes, and the Pacific Research Institute. I just announced I was a senior fellow there, so I'm trying to cause trouble as much as I can in the think tank world.
Yeah, there is great. Is that Pacific Research Institute out of San Francisco?
It is, yeah, San Francisco based. I think they're doing just the best work on public policy in California and local stuff, which I'm obviously passionate about, and then some great stuff on healthcare at the federal level.
Yeah. Now, Brian, the Pacific Research Institute, is that a fortress of some kind, considering the fact that it's in the Bay Area?
We always joke about that too. There is a pocket of conservatives. It's like Berkeley. UC Berkeley has the largest Republican club on campus. It's because when you're that outnumbered, you have to kind of flock together for protection, I guess. But yeah, it's a kind of a jewel hidden in San Francisco. I don't think that Gavin Newsom even knows that they exist, or he'd probably try to pass some ordinance to shut them down.
It's funny. My daughter lives up in that area, and Nancy Pelosi was the moderate in the election when she ran for the House last time. It was somebody else, actually more liberal than her. So
that says something, right?
Yeah, it does. Brandon, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, one of the reasons why we wanted to have you on, Brian, is we'd heard about your CEO series. And we hear a lot about public policy from policy wonks, but we don't hear as much straightforward, honest conversation from CEOs about their reactions to policies that we read about that seem to us to be increasingly intrusive and potentially creating a bad business climate for future growth. I mean, I think most people in our area read Atlas Shrugged when they were growing up in high school. That's a situation where CEOs, I don't want to give away the book for those who haven't read it, but many business leaders decide that it's time to shrug and run off to a place called Galt's Gulch out in the mountains and protest that way. But today we live in a global environment where businesses could have the option, potentially, and it's sad to believe this, but relocate to more business-friendly countries when the United States does not compete in terms of regulations and taxes. Have you heard anything from people you've interviewed in your CEO series on that topic?
Absolutely. It's interesting because when you're interviewing these CEOs, especially of huge companies, multinational companies, you have to listen closely because what they say is one thing, but what they left unsaid is also very important. And many of them have complained about, obviously, regulations and tax burdens in California, but also many of them are starting to become more concerned about regulations coming from the federal government over the last several years, but under the current administration, they're even more concerned. What they say or what they infer is that we are a global company. We don't have to do things here. So in the context of Obamacare, for example, a couple companies, big companies, said to me, look, that's great if President Obama wants to pass this, but we don't have to do our research and development in this country. We can do our research and development elsewhere. And there are other markets that are just as green and that are courting companies with such research and development and innovation infrastructures. And so that's the scary part. Steve Wynn, I didn't interview him, but maybe I will. Maybe I'll make a trip to Las Vegas. But he's the kind of casino mogul who owns the Wynn, several other casinos in Las Vegas. He did an interesting interview recently where he was saying that he's moving part of their corporate operations to China because China is more advantageous in terms of business climate than the United States, simply because, and I think this is critical, because their political system is more stable. Not necessarily that their system of governance is more stable, but they're not going to create crazy laws that come out of nowhere that impact the way business is done. They're pretty good on trying to encourage businesses to grow in China. They have a lot of other problems, don't get me wrong. But I think that's telling when a CEO says, look, China, in terms of laws coming out of their political bodies are much safer than the instability coming out of Washington, D.C.
That's amazing. Brian, I saw that interview with Steve Wynn, and you could tell the frustration on his face when he was talking about it. It was just kind of like throwing his hands up. Are a lot of other CEOs that you talk to feeling that, and they're just afraid to say anything?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the case. I mean, many of them are scared, frankly, of, I think, retaliation from the federal government. They don't want to be targeted in any way. There are numerous stories of industries who are, the FTC comes out with a ruling on this industry or that industry and completely changes the ways that they do business. So many of the CEOs are concerned that they'll be targeted. And then the other side of the story is that some of them have benefited from government policy in the past. One it wasn't a CEO, but one senior executive of a parcel company was complaining about the way, not the way they're regulated, but the way their opponents or their competitors were not regulated. So they had benefited. What they wanted the federal government to do was to change the regulations to force their competitor to be regulated in the same ways they were, because they wanted competitive advantage in the marketplace. So, it's a myth to think that many of the CEOs are kind of free market types. I mean, they're businessmen. They're there to make business. They're there to make money. Many of them are free market guys, which is great, and gals. But some of them, see the system and see that to make money, sometimes they have to manipulate the system. And so, yes, there's absolutely an air amongst some of these top CEOs that we can't say what we'd like to say. And in confidence, some of the stuff that they tell me off camera, I don't share. But that's the stuff that's more scary that I wish they would say on camera, and I'm not quite sure how you motivate them to do so. Though I will say that there's a growing number of corporate leaders and small business leaders in America who are no longer remaining silent. They're coming out and they're saying, look, this is unacceptable, this is why, and they're getting off the sidelines, which is exactly what we need.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a bigger backlash come November from the business community than I think the Democrats think. We're talking with Brian Calle on Taking Care of Business, Kern Radio Newstalk 1180. Brian, another question I had for you was, in fact, I signed up for your Freedom Politics. That was a great website. I really, really enjoyed that.
Oh, thanks. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And there's some great articles in there, and there are a lot of articles I noticed from the Heritage Foundation, places like that. And, you kind of recap the articles, which is kind of fun. Do you have any comment on what's going on now with... there was an article I saw there that kind of caught my attention, talking about Obama tax hikes defended by myths and straw men. Did you see that? Talking about the huge $921 billion tax increase beginning on January 1st?
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny when President Obama talks outside one side of his mouth and says, "Oh, we're going to cut taxes and we're going to do this and we're going to do that," and the other side of his mouth he wants to raise taxes, and as far as I'm concerned, not extending the Bush tax cuts, all of them, is raising taxes. I mean, you can't talk out of one side of your mouth and say, I'm going to lower taxes for this person and that person, these people making this much, and then leave a whole bunch of people in the U.S. who are suffering with the holding the check, so to speak, and then couple that with all of the different taxes and fees that impact small businesses and large businesses as a result of Obamacare and various other regulations he's trying to pass. And one side of his mouth, let's cut taxes. Other side of his mouth, let's tax and fee more. And then we're going to spend us into oblivion. And so it's the same kind of rhetoric, and that's the unfortunate part, I think, of this administration, which is that many of us, myself included, even though I didn't vote for him, I hoped that all of the dialogue about this being a post-partisan era would come to fruition, but it hasn't. It's become more partisan, I think, and it's the same kind of progressive slant on economics, and unfortunately, it's tax, spend, and in the end, that doesn't really get us very far.
Yeah, that phenomenon of talking out of both sides of the president's mouth goes straight back to your instability theme, where businesses, if you're in business, you have to do long-term planning. And if you can't trust any single voice in terms of knowing where the regulatory environment will be in the future and the tax environment, you just simply cannot do long-term planning, and you have to go into freeze mode. You can't hire?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because our leaders in Washington, D.C. don't understand this. I had Congressman Loretta Sanchez, who's the lone Democrat in the House of Representatives from Orange County, in my office last week, and we were discussing this, and she said, look, corporations are flush with cash. They have plenty of money. They could hire. They could help get us out of this economic situation, but they're not. And you know, I'm sitting back in my chair thinking, well, you know, I've talked to a lot of these CEOs, and I actually told them this too, and they can't because they're afraid of what you're going to do in Washington, D.C., what the next set of regulations is going to be, and how they're going to adjust their businesses and their bottom line accordingly. They have to account to their employees. They have to account to their shareholders. They have to account, if they're a public company, to the American people. So, you know, for our leaders to be so naive in Washington, D.C., it's almost criminal.
Yeah, Brian, this actually reminds me of a book by, is it Amity Shales, Forgotten Man, that came out? Another think tank author. Excellent book. There's the work you're doing. I wanted to ask you, we have callers, listeners on the show who are Tea Party patriots. They're local conservative activists. How do we draw a connection between the good work that you do in terms of your work with the Pacific Research Institute, the Claremont Institute, the brainy stuff? How do we get that to the troops on the ground? How do we get you two collaborating? Because I want to see that your research is put to the best use possible.
Well, I think it starts with getting people to come to the website and reading it. I mean, the great thing about social media and the internet, and everyone's talking about social media and the internet, so it's kind of redundant, but is that it makes everything so accessible for so many people. And so if we can get more people to come to our website, sign up for our stuff, and then send it out, share it with their friends on Facebook, on Twitter, on whatever, but just get the message out. Because I think that these types of grassroots movements are going to make all the difference, and that's why we're seeing the shift in the country. I was at lunch today, and someone told me the best thing that's happened to our country is the election of President Obama. And I had to sit back for a minute and think about that. And, you know, I couldn't disagree, because now you have people who've never been interested in politics, never interested in even casting a vote, who are out, you know, protesting or you know, registering voters or whatever it is. They're just out and about. And the last time we saw this was under Ronald Reagan. It was kind of centered around him and his philosophy, the Reagan Revolution. And this time it's not. It's about people who were never involved in politics but have a core belief system in what this country was founded on, and they're getting active. And I think that's due in large part to the ease of communication through Facebook, Twitter, all those types of social media outlets. And I think that the more and more people are getting our information from all the different organizations that you mentioned, that's going to be pivotal in turning this whole thing around, because it's not about Republicans, Democrats. It's about the founding fathers and their vision for our country, and upholding what and preserving what that was.
Exactly.
And I think that that's within the core psyche of all American people, and so it's great to see that's happening, but we need more and more and more.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, I had lunch with a friend of mine the other day who made a similar comment. He said, you know, Carter gave us Reagan, and I thought that was an excellent point. Can we hold you through one more break?
Oh, sure, yeah, no problem.
Great, okay, and then I'd like you to give your Facebook address when we come back.
Oh, awesome,
This is Taking Care of Business on Kern Radio Newstalk 1180.